Not able to right now. That was cool. I can't believe I did that. What the heck? I'm not able to right now. That was cool.
Welcome back to the channel. Have you ever wondered what happens when the most dangerous man on the East Coast realizes his greatest vulnerability has just been discovered by a girl earning minimum wage? Tonight, we dive into a story of power, hidden worlds, and a single act of kindness that changed the fate of an entire crime syndicate. When a desperate maid at a billionaire's masquerade gala breaks protocol to comfort a child everyone else treats like a ghost, she unknowingly catches the eye of a ruthless mafia boss. Stay tuned, because in this world, kindness can either be your salvation or your death sentence. The air inside the grand ballroom of the Romano estate in Oyster Bay, Long Island, was thick with the suffocating scent of Tom Ford black orchid and aged Scotch. Serena Brooks stood rigidly by the towering marble columns near the grand staircase, her posture aching under the starched, uncomfortable constraints of her black and white maid's uniform. She was a temporary hire through Apex Elite Staffing, brought in to serve the city's most untouchable elite at the annual Autumn Gala. She had strict orders: keep the silver trays of Dom Perignon 2012 full, keep her head down, and above all, do not make eye contact with the host. That host was Gabriel Romano. Publicly, Gabriel was a titan of private equity, a venture capitalist who bought and sold Fortune 500 companies before breakfast. Privately, in the hushed, terrified whispers of the criminal underworld, he was the head of the Romano syndicate. At 34, he was a widower and a man forged in ice and violence. Serena watched him from across the room. He wore a custom midnight blue Brioni suit that draped flawlessly over his broad shoulders, a rare Patek Philippe Grand Complications watch gleaming subtly at his wrist. His sharp, aristocratic features were locked in a mask of polite indifference as he navigated the sea of sycophants, politicians, and rival bosses hiding behind silk masquerade masks. But Serena's attention didn't linger on the dangerous billionaire. Her eyes were drawn to a small, isolated figure near the towering floral arrangements of white hydrangeas and bleeding hearts. It was a little boy, no older than 8. He was dressed in a miniature tuxedo that seemed entirely too stiff for his small frame. This was Arthur, Gabriel's only son, and the sole heir to the Romano Empire. Serena had heard the vicious gossip in the catering tents before the event started. "The boy's not right," one of the veteran servers had whispered, taking a drag from a cigarette. "Something wrong with his head. Doesn't speak. Flaps his hands. They say Romano is ashamed of him. Keeps him locked up in the East Wing most of the year. Tragic, really. All that blood money, and no proper heir to leave it to." Nah. Serena gripped her silver tray tighter, her knuckles turning white. She watched as Arthur stood near the edge of the dance floor, completely overwhelmed. The gala was a sensory nightmare. A 12-piece string quartet was playing a frantic, echoing Vivaldi piece. The flash of a society photographer's camera strobed like lightning. Women draped in diamonds laughed in shrill, piercing tones, and the clinking of crystal champagne flutes created a high-pitched cacophony. Arthur's small hands were clamped tightly over his ears. His eyes were squeezed shut, and he was rocking back and forth on his heels, a low, distressed hum vibrating from his chest. Serena's heart twisted. Before dropping out of nursing school to care for her ailing mother and drowning in medical debt to Mount Sinai Hospital, she had worked extensively in pediatric behavioral therapy. She recognized the signs immediately. Arthur wasn't throwing a tantrum. He was experiencing a severe sensory overload. He was drowning in a sea of noise and light, completely paralyzed by the sheer volume of his environment. What sickened Serena the most wasn't the boy's distress, but the reaction of the adults around him. A prominent state senator stepped right over Arthur's foot without a downward glance, as if the child were merely a piece of dropped luggage. A group of socialites, wearing dresses that cost more than Serena's yearly rent, stood just a few feet away. Serena could read their lips and hear the cruelty bleeding through their soft, cultured voices. "Look at him," a woman in a crimson silk gown murmured behind her feathered mask. "It's practically a tragedy. Gabriel deserves better." "I heard he had to fire the last 3 nannies because the boy bit one of them," her companion replied, sipping her drink. "It's a wonder he brings the creature out in public at all. So bad for the family image." They giggled, turning their backs to the terrified child. Not a single person offered help. Not a single bodyguard, though they lined the perimeter of the room like statues, stepped forward. They were all too afraid to touch the boss's son, or perhaps too indifferent to care. Arthur's humming grew louder, shifting into a high-pitched, breathy whimper. He began to hit the side of his thigh with a closed fist, a repetitive, punishing rhythm. The sheer, blinding isolation of the boy hit Serena like a physical blow. She knew the golden rule of her employment: do not engage with the guests, do not cause a scene. If she were fired tonight, she would default on her mother's oxygen tank payments by Friday. The consequences of stepping out of line were catastrophic. Yet, as another camera flashed, and Arthur dropped to his knees, burying his face in the carpet, Serena knew she couldn't stay frozen. The indifference of the room was entirely suffocating. Carefully, she set her heavy silver tray of champagne down on a nearby mahogany console table. She untied the stiff, ruffled catering apron that restricted her breathing and tossed it beside the glasses. Taking a deep, steadying breath, Serena stepped away from the shadows of the marble columns and walked directly onto the gleaming hardwood floor, walking straight into the crosshairs of New York's most dangerous family. The distance between the wall and Arthur felt like a mile. Serena moved with deliberate slowness, making sure her footsteps were soft but visible. With children experiencing severe autistic meltdowns, sudden movements were like setting off fireworks in a closed room. She knelt on the expensive Persian rug, about 3 feet away from Arthur. The scent of spilled champagne and heavy floor wax filled her nose. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she sat back on her heels and began to rhythmically tap her own fingers against the hardwood floor, a steady, predictable, low-frequency sound that undercut the erratic, high-pitched noise of the gala. Tap, tap, tap. Arthur didn't look up, but his fist paused in mid-air. He was still covering his ears, his breathing ragged and shallow. "It's entirely too loud in here, isn't it?" Serena said. Her voice was pitched low, soft, and completely devoid of the pity or exasperation the boy was undoubtedly used to hearing. "It feels like 1,000 bees buzzing inside your head." Arthur peeked through the gaps of his fingers. His eyes were a startling, brilliant blue, the exact same shade as his father's, but dilated with sheer panic. "My name is Serena," she continued, keeping her hands visible and resting them gently on her knees. "When things get too loud for me, I like to find the quietest rhythm in the room and focus only on that. Do you hear the cello playing?" The string quartet across the room was playing something fast and sweeping, but beneath the frantic violins, the heavy, mournful drawl of the cello provided a steady, vibrating bass. Arthur squeezed his eyes shut again, but he gave a minuscule, hesitant nod. "Good," Serena whispered. "Let's listen to the cello. Just the cello." She stood up slowly and extended her hand, palm up, not forcing him to take it. "It's hard to listen when we're sitting in all this noise. I know a secret balcony, just down the hall. It's quiet there. We can stomp out the rest of the noise together. Would you like to dance the loud away?" For a long, agonizing moment, Arthur stared at her hand. The wealthy guests around them had finally begun to notice the strange maid kneeling on the floor. Murmurs rippled through the nearby crowd. "What is she doing? Does she know whose son that is?" Ignoring the burning stares, Serena kept her gaze locked entirely on the boy. Slowly, hesitantly, Arthur unclasped one hand from his ear. His small, trembling fingers reached out and rested against Serena's palm. A collective gasp seemed to echo from the socialites behind her, but Serena tuned it out. She gently wrapped her fingers around his and stood, leading the boy away from the crushing center of the ballroom. She guided him through a set of heavy, velvet-draped French doors that opened into a dimly lit, glass-enclosed conservatory. The heavy glass muted the orchestra to a dull, underwater thrum. The cool autumn air seeped through the glass, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine, instantly breaking the suffocating perfume of the gala. Much better, Serena exhaled, smiling warmly down at him. Arthur let go of her hand and immediately began to pace, his hands flapping near his chest again to regulate the lingering adrenaline. "Now," Serena said, kicking off her cheap, uncomfortable black catering shoes, so she stood in her stocking feet. "This is how we dance to the cello." She began to sway, exaggerating the slowness of her movements. She closed her eyes and moved her arms in wide, sweeping, predictable arcs. "Deep breath in on the pull," she narrated softly, inhaling deeply, and heavy stomp on the downbeat. She brought her foot down with a solid, grounding thud against the stone floor. Arthur stopped pacing. He watched her intently. Serena repeated the motion. "Sway, pull, breathe in. Stomp. Your turn," she encouraged gently. "Stomp the noise into the ground." Arthur hesitated. Then, awkwardly, he mimicked her sway. He raised his small foot in his shiny leather shoe and brought it down. Thud. "Exactly," Serena smiled, her eyes shining with genuine warmth. "Again, let's get all the bees out." For the next 10 minutes, hidden away in the cool shadows of the conservatory, the maid and the Mafia boss's son danced. It wasn't a waltz or a tango. It was a bizarre, beautiful routine of heavy stomps, deep breaths, and slow sways. With every stomp, the tension bled out of Arthur's shoulders. His frantic breathing slowed. A small, almost imperceptible smile ghosted across his lips. Serena laughed softly as Arthur stomped particularly hard, sending a vibration up her legs. She spun around, feeling lighter than she had in months. But as she turned, her breath hitched, catching painfully in her throat. Standing in the doorway of the conservatory, partially obscured by the shadows of the velvet drapes, was Gabriele Romano. Serena froze, her heart plummeting straight into her stomach. She didn't know how long he had been standing there. His face was entirely unreadable, chiseled from marble, his dark blue eyes tracking the scene with terrifying intensity. 2 massive bodyguards flanked him in the hallway, their hands resting ominously inside their suit jackets. Arthur, noticing Serena's sudden stillness, turned. Seeing his father, the boy immediately dropped his arms. He didn't run to Gabriel. Instead, he stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on the floor, the anxiety instantly rushing back into his small frame. Gabriel stepped fully into the conservatory. The sheer, physical presence of the man seemed to suck the oxygen from the room. He looked at his son, and then his gaze slowly, methodically shifted to Serena. He took in her discarded apron, her shoeless feet, and the flushed, panicked look on her face. "I apologize, Mr. Romano," Serena stammered, frantically stepping back and bowing her head. "He was overwhelmed by the noise. I was just trying to help him regulate. I'll return to my post immediately." Gabriel didn't say a word. He walked slowly across the stone floor, his leather shoes clicking sharply against the tile. He stopped right in front of Serena. Up close, he smelled of expensive tobacco, dark roasted coffee, and something metallic and dangerous. "You left your station." Gabriel's voice was a low, gravelly baritone that sent a shiver racing down Serena's spine. It wasn't a question. It was a lethal statement of fact. "Yes, sir. I'm sorry." Gabriel looked down at Arthur. For a fleeting fraction of a second, the coldness in the Mafia boss's eyes cracked, revealing a deep, hollow exhaustion. He reached out and gently laid a large, scarred hand on his son's shoulder. Arthur flinched slightly, but allowed the touch. Gabriel turned his piercing gaze back to Serena. "Go back to the kitchen, Miss Brooks," he said softly. Serena's blood ran cold. He knew her name. Of course he knows my name, she thought wildly. He knows everything about everyone in his house. She grabbed her shoes, slipped past the towering men in the doorway, and practically ran back towards the servants' quarters, knowing with absolute certainty that she had just ruined her life. The following morning, the Romano estate was entirely unrecognizable. The masquerade gala had vanished, the catering tents dismantled before dawn. The sprawling mansion was now quiet, operating with the terrifying, hushed precision of a military bunker. Serena sat shivering on a hard wooden chair in the subterranean staff kitchen. She hadn't been sent home on the midnight shuttle with the rest of the Apex elite temp staff. Instead, Mrs. Gable, the estate's iron-fisted head housekeeper, had intercepted her in the locker room, confiscated her coat, and told her to wait. That was 6 hours ago. Serena's hands were shaking violently around a cold cup of coffee. She had run through every possible horrific scenario in her mind. Gabriel Romano wasn't a man who simply fired people. In the world he inhabited, people who crossed lines or discovered vulnerabilities often disappeared into the murky depths of the Long Island Sound. She had touched his son. She had witnessed a moment of weakness. She was a liability. The heavy kitchen doors swung open, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. A tall, impeccably dressed man with slicked-back dark hair and a jagged scar running through his left eyebrow stepped inside. Serena recognized him from the tabloids and the terrifying rumors. Matteo, Gabriel's underboss, and closest enforcer. "Brooks," Matteo said, his voice completely flat. "Get up. The boss wants to see you." Serena's legs felt like lead, but she forced herself to stand. "Am I going to the police?" she asked, her voice trembling. Matteo let out a short, humorless bark of laughter. "The police? Cute. Walk." He led her out of the kitchen, up a spiral servant staircase, and into the restricted east wing of the manor. The wealth on display here was staggering. Original Renaissance paintings hung on silk-paneled walls, and priceless antique rugs muffled their footsteps. Security cameras were tucked seamlessly into the ornate crown molding. Matteo stopped in front of heavy, double oak doors. He knocked twice, didn't wait for an answer, and pushed the doors open, gesturing for Serena to enter. Gabriel Romano's private office was an intimidating cavern of dark mahogany, wall-to-wall leather-bound books, and bulletproof glass windows that overlooked the crashing grey waves of the ocean. Gabriel sat behind a massive desk, illuminated only by the grey morning light filtering through the storm clouds outside. He was no longer wearing the tuxedo. Instead, he wore a crisp white dress shirt, sleeves rolled up to the elbows, exposing forearms corded with muscle and faded, intricate tattoos. He didn't look up from the file he was reading as the doors clicked shut behind Serena, leaving her entirely alone with him. "Sit," he commanded softly. Serena practically fell into one of the velvet guest chairs opposite his desk. She kept her eyes glued to the edge of his mahogany desk, terrified to meet his gaze. Gabriel closed the file. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers under his chin. He studied her in silence for a full minute. The weight of his stare was a physical pressure, dissecting her down to the bone. "Serena Lily Brooks," Gabriel finally spoke, his deep voice carrying effortlessly across the room. 22 years old. Born in Queens. No criminal record. Dropped out of the pediatric nursing program at NYU 18 months ago. Currently drowning in approximately $84,000 of medical debt due to your mother's severe COPD. Serena gasped, her head snapping up. "How do you have that information?" "I know the blood type of every person who breathes the air in my home," Gabriel replied coldly. He picked up a silver pen and twirled it slowly between his long fingers. "Last night, you abandoned your designated post. You broke a direct contract with Apex Elite. You approached a member of my family without authorization, and you led my son into an isolated room. In my world, Miss Brooks, unauthorized people who pull my son into dark rooms usually end up with a bullet in their skull." Serena stopped breathing. Panic surged up her throat. "Please," she whispered, a desperate tear escaping her eye. "Mr. Romano, I swear to God, I wasn't." He was suffering. Everyone was just standing there, ignoring him. The noise, the lights. It was hurting him. I just wanted to give him a safe place to breathe. I'll leave right now. You'll never see me again. Gabriel's expression remained stone, but the grip on his silver pen tightened. Everyone ignores Arthur, Gabriel said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a lethal edge, because they are cowards, because they look at him and see a broken heir to an empire they want a piece of. They whisper behind their masks, thinking I don't hear them. He stood up slowly, leaning his knuckles against the desk, leaning closer to her. Since my wife died, I have hired the most expensive behavioral specialists, doctors and nannies in the state. Every single one of them treats Arthur like a patient, a liability, or a ticking time bomb. They flinch when he moves. They medicate him to keep him quiet. Gabriel walked around the desk, his presence entirely overwhelming, as he stopped beside her chair. Last night, Gabriel continued softly, staring down at her. You did not look at my son with pity. You didn't flinch. You didn't treat him like a monster or a ghost. You took off your shoes and you danced with him, and for the first time in 3 years, I saw my son smile. Serena looked up at him, completely bewildered. The terrifying Mafia boss looked tired. Beneath the lethal exterior, she saw the desperate, exhausted soul of a father who was failing the one person he loved. I am not going to fire you, Miss Brooks, nor am I going to kill you, Gabriel said smoothly, walking back to his desk and opening a side drawer. He pulled out a thick, legal document and slid it across the polished wood toward her. I am going to hire you. Serena stared at the document. Hire me? As a maid? As Arthur's permanent live-in caretaker, Gabriel corrected. You will be provided a suite in the East Wing. You will have full authority over his daily routine, overriding the doctor's. Your salary will be $200,000 a year, deposited off the books into a Cayman account. Furthermore, Gabriel tapped the desk, his eyes locking onto hers with burning intensity. I have already arranged for a cashier's check to be delivered to Mount Sinai Hospital this morning. Your mother's medical debt is completely eradicated. Serena's jaw dropped. The room started to spin. I don't understand. $200,000, paying off my debt? Mr. Romano, I'm not a licensed therapist. I'm just a temp. I don't need a therapist, Gabriel growled, leaning forward. I need someone who isn't afraid of the dark. I need someone who sees Arthur. This is not a request, Serena. This is a lifeline. Take it. Serena looked at the contract. The sheer sum of money, the absolute erasure of her suffocating debt. It was a miracle. But tying herself to the Romano family? Living in the house of a known crime lord? It was a deal with the devil. What's the catch? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Gabriel smiled, a sharp, wolfish expression that didn't reach his eyes. The catch is that you belong to the Romano household now. You do not speak of what you see. You do not leave the grounds without my security detail. And if you ever betray my son... The threat hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Before Serena could reach for the pen, the office doors flew open. Matteo stepped in, his face entirely drained of color. Boss, Matteo interrupted, glancing warily at Serena. We have a massive problem. Gabrielle's head snapped up, the furious boss instantly returning. I told you I wasn't to be disturbed. It's the Volkov Syndicate, Matteo said grimly, stepping closer to the desk. They had a rat at the gala last night. They saw everything. They know about the girl. Matteo pointed a scarred finger at Serena. Word is already on the street, Gabriel. The Russians know the boy has a new weakness, and they're going to use her to get to him. Gabriel's eyes darkened to pitch black. He looked at Serena, the air between them suddenly charged with a terrifying, electric danger. The trap hadn't just closed on Serena, she had just been painted with a target. The silence in Gabriel Romano's sprawling, mahogany-lined office was suddenly deafening. The stormy grey light filtering through the bulletproof glass seemed to cast long, skeletal shadows across the Persian rug. Serena sat frozen in the velvet guest chair, her fingers trembling so violently she had to clasp them together in her lap. "The Volkovs," Gabriel repeated. The name slithered out of his mouth like a curse. The exhaustion that had softened his features just moments ago vanished completely, replaced by the cold, lethal mask of the syndicate boss. He looked at Matteo, his jaw ticking. How did Nikolai Volkov get a rat past the biometric scanners at the gate? Matteo shifted his weight, his hand instinctively brushing against the concealed holster beneath his tailored charcoal suit. It was one of the valet drivers contracted from a third-party vendor in Manhattan. He slipped a micro camera into the conservatory's exterior foliage before the shift started. They have footage of the girl with Arthur. More importantly, they have footage of you watching her. Nikolai knows you're fiercely protective of the boy. Seeing a civilian get that close, it changes the board. Serena's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was a 22-year-old nursing school dropout who lived in a cramped two-bedroom apartment in Astoria, Queens. She clipped coupons for groceries. The criminal underworld was something she only knew from late-night true crime documentaries. Now, she was suddenly a pawn in a war between two of the deadliest factions on the East Coast. "I have to go," Serena breathed, standing up so fast her chair scraped harshly against the floor. "I have to get to my mother. If these people know who I am, they might go to her apartment. I can't be here." Gabriel moved with terrifying speed. In 2 strides, he was standing between Serena and the heavy oak doors, blocking her exit. "You are not going back to Astoria," Gabriel said, his voice a low, commanding rumble that demanded absolute obedience. "If Nikolai Volkov knows your face, your apartment is already being watched. If you walk out of my gates, you will be snatched off the street in Brooklyn before you even reach the subway. They will torture you to find out the security protocols of this estate, and then they will kill you to send me a message." Serena stopped dead, the blood draining from her face. "But my mother is being relocated as we speak," Gabriel interrupted smoothly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his encrypted satellite phone, tossing it onto the desk. 10 minutes ago, I dispatched a private medical transport unit to her building. She is currently en route to a private, heavily guarded suite at New York Presbyterian Hospital under an assumed name. Her treatments will continue uninterrupted, and she will be completely safe. Serena stared at him, her mind spinning. He had orchestrated the complete upheaval of her entire life before she had even finished her cup of coffee in the basement kitchen. "You don't have a choice anymore, Serena," Gabriel said softly, stepping closer. The scent of his expensive Tom Ford cologne and dark coffee wrapped around her, intoxicating and dangerous. "You stepped into my world the second you took my son's hand. Now, the only safe place for you on this earth is inside my house, protected by my men." He gestured back to the desk, where the thick employment contract still lay next to the silver pen. "Sign the paper. Become Arthur's caretaker. I will lock down this estate, and I swear to you, the Volkov Syndicate will not touch a single hair on your head. But if you walk out that door, I cannot protect you." Tears pricked Serena's eyes, but she blinked them back. She thought of her mother, breathing easily in a top-tier hospital suite. She thought of little Arthur, hitting his leg in distress, completely misunderstood by the people paid to care for him. She was trapped in a gilded cage, but she realized she didn't have the luxury of hesitation. With a shaky exhale, Serena walked back to the desk, picked up the silver pen, and signed her name on the dotted line. Gabriel's shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. "Matteo," he ordered, without looking away from Serena. "Move Miss Brooks into the East Wing, Suite 4, adjacent to Arthur's rooms. Double the perimeter guards. No one enters or leaves the property without my personal authorization." Within an hour, Serena found herself standing in a bedroom larger than her entire apartment. The walls were draped in soft, cream-colored silk, and a massive, king-sized bed dominated the center of the room, covered in a plush Loro Piana cashmere throw. The adjoining marble bathroom featured a soaking tub that overlooked the private gardens, but the luxury was utterly suffocating. The windows, she noticed, were reinforced glass, and a discreet panic button was mounted directly next to the nightstand. She had just finished changing out of her stiff catering uniform into a pair of soft, neutral-toned sweatpants and a long-sleeved shirt provided by the estate staff, when a sharp knock echoed from the hallway. A grim-faced security guard escorted her down the wide, carpeted corridor to Arthur's playroom. When Serena stepped inside, she immediately felt a surge of professional frustration. The room was beautiful, filled with expensive educational toys, but it was entirely wrong for a child with sensory processing issues. The overhead lights were bright, buzzing fluorescents. The walls were painted a stark, stimulating primary red. Arthur was sitting in the corner, wearing noise-cancelling headphones, furiously spinning the wheels of a plastic toy truck. Standing over him was a tall, severe-looking man in a white clinical coat, holding a clipboard. "No, Arthur. We do not spin the wheels," the man commanded sharply. He reached down and forcefully grabbed Arthur's hand, stopping the repetitive motion. "Look at me. Eye contact. We play with the truck on the track." Arthur immediately let out a distressed, high-pitched vocalization and began to rock back and forth, hitting his chin with his free hand. "Excuse me," Serena said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. She stepped fully into the room. The man turned, eyeing her up and down with obvious disdain. "And you are?" "Serena Brooks, Arthur's new head caretaker." The man scoffed. "I am Dr. Sterling, the lead behavioral analyst for the Romano family. I was not informed of any new hires. Please step outside. We are in the middle of a discreet trial training session." "You're causing a meltdown," Serena said flatly, ignoring his title. She walked straight past Dr. Sterling and knelt on the floor a few feet away from Arthur. "He is visually stimming with the wheels to regulate his nervous system because those overhead lights are giving him a migraine. Stimming must be redirected to socially appropriate behaviors," Dr. Sterling argued, his face flushing with anger. "Mr. Romano pays me a premium to normalize the boy's behavior. He pays you to care for his son, not turn him into a robot," Serena fired back. She reached up and flipped the switch on the wall, killing the harsh fluorescent lights. The room instantly plunged into a softer, natural gloom, illuminated only by the large bay windows. Arthur's rocking slowed immediately. He let out a deep breath, the tension leaving his small shoulders. Serena didn't touch Arthur's toy. Instead, she sat on the floor, pulled a different toy truck toward her, and turned it upside down. She began to spin the wheels, mirroring Arthur's exact behavior. Arthur watched her. Slowly, he reached out and spun the wheels of his own truck. Serena smiled warmly at him, offering no demands, no forced eye contact, and no harsh corrections. She simply existed in his space, validating his needs. Dr. Sterling was furious. "I will be speaking with Mr. Romano about this blatant interference," he snapped, turning on his heel. As he stormed out, Serena heard the heavy, unmistakable footsteps of Gabriel Romano approaching from the hallway. Gabriel stopped in the doorway, his massive frame filling the space. He looked at Dr. Sterling's red face, and then past him, to where Serena was sitting quietly on the floor, spinning a plastic wheel with his son. "Dr. Sterling," Gabriel's voice was dangerously calm, "your services are no longer required. Gather your things and have security escort you to the gate." Sterling gaped. "Sir, you can't be serious. This maid knows nothing of clinical methodology." Gabriel didn't even look at the doctor. His dark blue eyes were locked entirely on Serena, a strange, intense warmth flickering in their depths. "She knows how to make the screaming stop," Gabriel said softly. "Get out of my house." A week passed inside the fortress of the Romano estate. For Serena, the days blurred into a strange, structured routine. The terrifying reality of the Volkov syndicate lurking beyond the gates was temporarily eclipsed by the demanding, yet deeply rewarding work of caring for Arthur. She had completely transformed his living space. Gone were the harsh lights and loud electronic toys. Serena ordered heavy weighted blankets, installed a soft canvas sensory swing in the center of the playroom, and introduced a strict, predictable visual schedule for Arthur to follow. The changes were miraculous. Arthur was no longer spending his days locked in an anxious, silent panic. He had started to initiate contact, occasionally grabbing Serena's sleeve to lead her to the grand piano in the music room, pressing her hand onto the keys to ask for a song. Gabriel watched it all. He was a ghost in his own home, often sequestered in his office, running his massive, illicit empire, but Serena constantly felt the weight of his gaze. She would catch him standing in the doorway of the conservatory as she and Arthur did their daily stomping dance. She would see him watching the security feeds on his tablet during dinner. The cold, ruthless Mafia boss seemed completely mesmerized by the young woman who had brought light back into his son's deadened world. On a crisp Tuesday morning, Serena knocked on the open door of Gabriel's office. He was on the phone, speaking rapidly in fluent, aggressive Italian, but the moment he saw her, he held up a hand, silencing the person on the other end, and hung up. "Is something wrong with Arthur?" Gabriel asked instantly, tension hardening his jaw. "No, he's having a great morning," Serena said, stepping into the room. She was wearing simple jeans and a thick, oversized wool sweater, yet she felt hyper-aware of Gabriel's intense scrutiny. "But we have a problem. Arthur needs deep proprioceptive input. The swing is great, but he needs to run. He needs uneven terrain, fresh air, and the sound of the ocean. He's been cooped up in this house for a week. He's getting restless." Gabriel frowned. "He can run in the gardens. The perimeter is secure." "The gardens are manicured perfectly flat, Mr. Romano," Serena insisted gently. "I want to take him to the beach. The sand provides heavy work for his joints, which calms his nervous system." Gabriel stood up, walking around his desk. He crossed his arms over his broad chest. "The Volkovs have been quiet, Serena. Too quiet. It means they are planning something. I am not letting you and my son leave the property." "Then we will regress," Serena said firmly, refusing to back down, even as his sheer size intimidated her. "I promise to care for him, Gabriel. I can't do that effectively if we treat him like a prisoner." It was the first time she had used his first name. The air in the office seemed to thicken, a sudden, electric charge sparking between them. Gabrielle's eyes dropped to her lips for a fraction of a second before meeting her gaze again. "Fine," Gabriel grumbled, his voice dropping an octave. "But I am coming with you." 45 minutes later, an armored, bulletproof Cadillac Escalade rolled out of the heavy iron gates of the Romano estate, flanked by 2 black Mercedes G-Wagons filled with Matteo and heavily armed security personnel. They were headed toward a private, secluded stretch of beach Gabriel owned near Montauk Point. Inside the Escalade, the atmosphere was thick. Arthur was strapped into his reinforced car seat, happily chewing on a silicone sensory necklace and looking out the tinted window. Serena sat next to him, her knee bouncing slightly with nervous energy. Gabriel sat opposite them, his dark eyes continually scanning the road, a suppressed Sig Sauer pistol resting casually on his thigh. "You don't have to look so terrified," Gabriel murmured, leaning forward slightly. "This convoy could withstand an RPG strike. You're safe." "I'm not used to needing a small army to go build a sandcastle," Serena shot back, though a small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Gabriel's lips twitched in amusement. "You adapt quickly, ragazza. I'll give you that." They reached the Montauk Highway, the dense forests of Long Island blurring past them. The ocean was just coming into view over the dunes when Matteo's voice crackled urgently over the secure radio on the dashboard. "Boss, we have a problem. 2 dark grey Range Rovers just merged off the Montauk exit. No plates. They're pacing us." Gabriel's amusement vanished instantly. He grabbed the radio. "Matteo, box them out. Do not let them pull alongside the Escalade. Driver, floor it." Serena's stomach plummeted. The Escalade's massive engine roared to life, throwing her back against the leather seat. She immediately unbuckled her own seatbelt and threw herself over Arthur's car seat, shielding his small body with her own. "Serena, stay down!" Gabriel barked, chambering around into his pistol. The screech of tires echoed loudly outside. One of the grey Range Rovers aggressively swerved into the oncoming lane, trying to bypass the rear G-Wagon guard. Suddenly, the deafening crack of automatic gunfire shattered the peaceful morning. Bullets rained against the Escalade, pinging harmlessly off the reinforced armor plating. But the noise was catastrophic. Arthur screamed. It wasn't a normal cry. It was a visceral, high-pitched shriek of absolute sensory agony. The sudden explosive noise inside the confined space of the vehicle was his worst nightmare realized. He began to thrash violently, hitting his head against the side of the car seat. "Arthur, no!" Serena gasped. Ignoring the sounds of bullets striking the glass just inches from her head, she clamped her hands securely over Arthur's ears. She pressed her forehead against his, completely exposing her back to the windows. "Look at me, Arthur!" Serena yelled over the chaos, her voice trembling but fierce. "Look at my eyes! Deep breath in, heavy stomp out. We are dancing to the cello. Find the cello!" Gabriel turned, his gun raised toward the window, ready to fire back, but he froze. He watched in awe as Serena, in the middle of a literal firefight, completely ignored her own safety to regulate his son's nervous system. She was whispering the rhythm of a song only they knew, rocking him through the gunfire. "Matteo!" Gabriel roared into the radio, a murderous rage exploding in his chest. "Run them off the road, now!" The driver of the Escalade swerved violently. Matteo's G-Wagon slammed aggressively into the side of the lead Range Rover. The heavy impact sent the enemy vehicle careening off the coastal highway, crashing violently through the wooden guardrail and flipping into the sandy marsh below. The second Range Rover, seeing the heavy retaliation, slammed on its brakes and skidded into a chaotic U-turn, abandoning the ambush. The Escalade sped away, putting miles between them and the wreckage in seconds. The silence that fell inside the cabin was ringing and heavy, broken only by Arthur's ragged, exhausting sobbing. Serena kept her hands over his ears, kissing his forehead repeatedly. "You're okay. You're safe. The bees are gone," she whispered shakily. Gabriel holstered his weapon. He moved across the spacious cabin, dropping to his knees on the floorboard right next to Serena. His large hand reached out, trembling slightly, and gently touched Serena's shoulder. "Are you hit?" Gabriel demanded, his eyes frantically scanning her body for blood. Serena shook her head, her own tears finally spilling over. She looked up at Gabriel, her heart pounding. "I'm okay. Arthur is okay." Gabriel looked from his weeping son to the fiercely protective woman holding him. A profound shift occurred in the Mafia boss's dark eyes. The walls of ice and calculated indifference completely shattered. In that adrenaline-fueled moment, Gabriel Romano realized that Serena Brooks wasn't just his son's caretaker. She was the most vital beating heart in his entire terrifying world, and he would burn the Volkov syndicate to the ground before he let them get near her again. Slowly, carefully, Gabriel wrapped his large arms around both Serena and Arthur, pulling them tightly against his chest, shielding them in the darkness of the armored car as they raced back to the fortress. The armored Escalade tore through the heavy iron gates of the Romano estate, tires screeching against the pristine cobblestone driveway, before slamming to a violent halt in front of the main portico. Before the vehicle had even fully settled, a swarm of heavily armed guards descended upon the courtyard, their weapons drawn, securing the perimeter with lethal efficiency. The sheer scale of the operation was staggering, a terrifying reminder of the invisible, violent empire Gabriel commanded. Inside the dim, silent cabin of the SUV, the heavy adrenaline of the ambush was slowly draining away, leaving behind a cold, trembling exhaustion. Arthur had finally cried himself to sleep, his small head resting heavily against Serena's chest. She had unbuckled herself completely, sitting awkwardly on the floorboard to cradle him, her fingers still gently tracing slow, rhythmic circles on his back to keep him grounded in sleep. Gabriel sat opposite them, bathed in the sharp, tactical lights of the courtyard. The terrifying Mafia boss had completely shed the polished veneer of the venture capitalist. His tie was discarded, his crisp white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, and his dark blue eyes burned with a murderous, unyielding fury. He stared at the bullet spiderwebs fracturing the reinforced glass just inches from where Serena's head had been. The reality of how close he had come to losing them both hung heavily in the confined space. "Give him to me," Gabriel murmured, his deep voice rough with emotion. Serena hesitated, instinctively tightening her protective grip on the sleeping boy. But Gabriel reached out, his large, scarred hands moving with astonishing gentleness. He scooped Arthur into his arms, pressing his son's face into the crook of his neck. Arthur stirred slightly, letting out a soft hum, before settling into his father's solid warmth. Gabriel stepped out of the vehicle, and Serena scrambled out after him. The damp, salty air of the Long Island Sound hit her face, a stark contrast to the smell of gunpowder that still clung to Gabriel's clothes. Matteo was already jogging towards them, his face a mask of grim determination. "Lock down the estate," Gabriel barked to Matteo, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "No one enters, no one leaves. Activate the tertiary defense grid. I want every single soldier we have patrolling the walls." "And the Volkovs?" Matteo asked, his hand resting on his holster. "I am going to burn Nikolai Volkov's empire to the ground," Gabriel stated flatly, the promise of violence absolute. "By sunrise, I want his safe houses in Brooklyn dismantled. I want his supply lines severed, and I want his head delivered to my desk." Matteo nodded sharply and disappeared into the flurry of guards. Gabriel turned to Serena. Without a word, he gestured with his chin towards the heavy mahogany doors of the mansion. They walked inside in silence, the heavy security detail melting into the shadows behind them. Gabriel carried Arthur all the way up the grand staircase and into the east wing, bypassing the playroom and heading straight for Arthur's bedroom. Serena pulled back the heavy, weighted blanket, and Gabriel gently laid the boy down. He didn't leave immediately. He stood over the bed, watching his son's chest rise and fall in the dim light. Serena stood across from him, her arms wrapped tightly around her own waist, trying to stop the violent trembling that had finally overtaken her body, now that the danger had passed. Gabriel looked up, his sharp gaze instantly locking onto her shaking frame. He walked around the bed, closing the distance between them until he was standing mere inches away. He reached out, his large hands gently gripping her shoulders. The heat radiating from him was grounding, pulling her back from the edge of panic. "You shielded him," Gabriel said softly, his thumbs brushing against her collarbones. "You didn't duck, you didn't hide. You put your body between my son and the bullets." "I couldn't let the noise hurt him," Serena whispered, her voice cracking. "He was so terrified, Gabriel. I had to keep him safe." Gabriel's eyes darkened, a storm of emotion swirling in their depths. "You are 22 years old. You are entirely unarmed, yet you are the bravest person in this entire God-forsaken syndicate." He stepped closer, his chest brushing against hers. "Do you understand what you have done to me, Serena? I brought you here to be a caretaker, but you have become the absolute center of my gravity. The thought of those bullets touching you." He didn't finish the sentence. Instead, Gabriel lowered his head, pressing his forehead against hers. It was a gesture of profound vulnerability from a man who had never bowed to anyone. Serena closed her eyes, leaning into his solid strength, the terrifying events of the day forging an unbreakable bond between them. "I am going to war tonight," Gabriel murmured, his breath warm against her lips. "I am going to do terrible things to ensure that no one ever threatens you or my son again. But when the blood is washed away and the city is quiet, I am coming back for you. Not as an employer. Do you understand?" Serena's heart hammered a frantic rhythm. She opened her eyes, meeting his intense, burning gaze. She was a maid from Queens, and he was the most dangerous man on the East Coast. But in the quiet sanctuary of the nursery, none of that mattered. "I understand," she whispered. Gabriel's hand cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing away a stray tear. He lingered for a fraction of a second, fighting the desperate urge to kiss her, before pulling away. He had a war to win. As he walked out of the room, plunging into the violent darkness of his world, Serena sat beside Arthur's bed, knowing her life would never be the same. The war with the Volkov syndicate lasted exactly 48 hours. It was a swift, brutal, and entirely merciless eradication that sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld of the entire eastern seaboard. Gabriel Romano did not merely retaliate. He completely annihilated his enemies with the cold, calculated precision of a predator protecting its family. When the smoke finally cleared, Nikolai Volkov was dead. His empire shattered into dust, and the Romano syndicate stood entirely unchallenged. But inside the fortified walls of the Long Island estate, the violence felt like a distant, fading nightmare. 6 months had passed since the ambush on the highway. Autumn had surrendered to a crisp, snow-covered winter, and the grand mansion was entirely transformed. The oppressive, museum-like silence that had once suffocated the halls was gone. Instead, the heavy mahogany corridors echoed with the bright, unfiltered sounds of life. Serena stood in the center of the grand conservatory, the very same room where she had first met Arthur. The heavy velvet drapes were pulled back, allowing the brilliant afternoon sunlight to stream through the reinforced glass, illuminating the lush, tropical foliage. She was no longer wearing the stiff, uncomfortable uniform of an Apex elite temp, nor the oversized sweatpants of a frightened captive. She wore a stunning, emerald green silk dress that draped perfectly over her frame, a silent testament to her permanent, elevated place within the household. Across the room, Arthur was sitting at a beautiful, custom-built sensory table filled with kinetic sand. He was no longer the terrified, isolated ghost of a boy who hid himself to block out the world. He was humming a happy, melodious tune, completely engrossed in building a sprawling castle. Every few minutes, he would look up, make fleeting but genuine eye contact with Serena, and offer a bright, brilliant smile before returning to his work. The transformation was nothing short of a miracle. With Serena's unwavering patience, structured routines, and deep empathy, Arthur had blossomed. He was communicating his needs through a tablet, initiating play, and most importantly, he was finally comfortable in his own skin. The heavy French doors opened, and Gabriel stepped into the conservatory. He was dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, fresh from a meeting in Manhattan, but the sharp, lethal edge that usually defined his presence completely vanished the moment he looked at his family. Gabriel walked over to the sensory table, his massive frame kneeling awkwardly on the stone floor. He didn't demand attention or force an interaction. He simply picked up a small plastic shovel and began digging a moat around Arthur's sandcastle. Arthur paused, watching his father's clumsy attempt, before gently taking the shovel from Gabriel's massive hand and demonstrating the correct way to dig the trench. Gabriel let out a low, rumbling laugh, the sound vibrating with genuine joy. He looked up, his piercing blue eyes finding Serena across the room. He stood, dusting the sand from his expensive trousers, and walked toward her. "Matteo tells me the new security protocols for the private school have been finalized," Gabriel said, stopping just inches from her. "Arthur starts his specialized integration program next week. Half days, just like you recommended." "He's ready," Serena smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "He's going to do incredibly well." Gabriel reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. The intense, burning heat between them had only deepened over the past 6 months. Gabriel had kept his promise. He had washed the blood from his hands, and he had returned to her, slowly and deliberately breaking down every wall between them. "He is ready, because of you," Gabriel murmured, his voice thick with emotion. You breathed life back into this house, Serena. You saved my son, and you saved me from the monster I was becoming." He stepped closer, his hand slipping around her waist to pull her flush against his chest. "I have conquered the city. I have destroyed my enemies. But none of it matters without you." Gabriel reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small, midnight blue velvet box. He didn't drop to one knee. That wasn't his style. Instead, he flipped the box open, revealing a breathtaking, flawless diamond ring. "I am a selfish, dangerous man, Serena," Gabriel said fiercely, his eyes locking onto hers. "But I will spend the rest of my life protecting your light. Marry me. Be my wife. Be his mother. Officially." Tears blurred Serena's vision. She looked at the terrifying Mafia boss who had brought the underworld to its knees, only to surrender his entire heart to her. She looked past his shoulder to Arthur, who was happily clapping his sandy hands. "Yes," Serena whispered, a radiant smile breaking across her face. "Yes, Gabriel." Gabriel let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a lifetime. He slid the ring onto her finger, the cold diamond warming instantly against her skin. Then he cupped her face and finally closed the distance, kissing her with a fierce, consuming passion that promised a lifetime of devotion. As they pulled apart, the distant sound of a cello began to play from the estate's hidden speakers. Gabriel smiled, intertwining his fingers with hers. He led her to the center of the conservatory, and as Arthur happily stomped his feet to the rhythm of the music, the Mafia boss and the maid began to dance, their broken pieces finally perfectly whole. And there you have it, the thrilling and heartwarming conclusion to our story. What started as a desperate act of kindness from a maid turned into a beautiful tale of fierce protection, unexpected love, and the healing power of understanding. Serena didn't just save Arthur from the terrifying isolation of his own mind. She saved Gabriel from the darkness of his ruthless world. We hope this dramatic journey of the Romano family kept you on the edge of your seat. If you loved this deep dive into the dangerous romantic world of the Mafia, please hit that like button. It really helps our channel grow. Share this video with your fellow romance drama lovers, and make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our upcoming stories. We have plenty more secrets, lies, and passionate romances to uncover. We will see you in the very next exciting video.